Thank you everybody for joining this tech talk. My name is Julien Eluard and I'm a Clojure developer, part of the dApps and dev team. And the goal of this talk is to present extensions, the high-level concept and just how they fit status and the global picture of dApps in general. All right, so what are extensions anyway? So extensions are a way for third parties and third parties developers to extend status and just provide directly within status the application their own features and plug with their own dApp level application. So they do this by just leveraging status features and with a native feeling. So there is no way technically to distinguish between a status feature and an extension. And that's kind of the goal. So, and because we have this power, we also need to take extra care specifically around privacy and security, because essentially you allow anyone to modify status. So we need to have some very strict rules here and make sure that no one will be able to leverage that to just store information or money in general. One of the main concepts we have here too is that we want to have extensions decentralized first, right? So because dApp, the concept of dApp in general is really about being decentralized, but then the reality that most dApps are not really decentralized and they usually rely on old web features. So we want to move away from this and push all the decentralization features available thanks to status. And the final point is extensions should be really easy to build. We want potentially anyone to be able to build and understand what is an extension and what it will do once you install it. So then what can you do with extensions? How is it useful? And how can it help make status like the best way to browse Ethereum? So just a couple of examples of the kind of things you would expect, but it's really just some ideas. But there is no limit really. So one thing we want to allow third-party developers to do is to create their own chat commands, and you can think like in group chat. I think there is a great potential for chat commands, because then you have access to all the contacts you have in this chat. And one example is a split the bill kind of application. So here you could directly split the bill among like the participant of your chat, and because you can leverage Ethereum, you can directly pay and do more advanced stuff here. Another potential example is streaming video. So in chat application, usually streaming video is kind of something important. We don't have it right now, and having extension would allow like other Ethereum project to provide this feature. Like for instance, LivePeer is providing that kind of feature. So if we can have them directly implement live streaming for us, that would be actually quite huge. Or other examples, like for instance, better DEX integration. So DEX are kind of big use cases in Ethereum. So it would be nice to allow them to just plug in chat, for instance, or maybe in wallet and provide some more advanced user interface. And the same way, we also have a nice ERC20 and 721 integration in wallets. For ERC 721, so NFTs, it's kind of ad hoc. So we have status, we have to provide the implementation per token. But if we open this to third-party developers, then it could be any NFT provider that would directly implement for us this particular feature. And lastly, another interesting idea is allowing to have ephemeral application running inside status. So for instance, let's say you go to a restaurant and then you want to have access to their menu or just order something. You could scan a QR code with status and then directly have access to this way to interact with the restaurant. And then, because probably you don't want to accumulate all those extensions per restaurant because it would just be a big mess. So it's just something that you would throw away. It's like you scan the QR code, you use the application, and then you move on. So that's kind of potential use cases, but I think that there can be a lot more. So how does it fit the status ecosystem? So how does it compare to what we already provide and have? Because status is kind of a complex application now, and so adding extensions, well, it will increase some way the complexity. So just to really understand where extension fits. So if you take a look at the top diagram, that's what we have currently. So at the bottom part, you have the Ethereum node, which provides all the access with the Ethereum blockchain. Then on top of that, we implemented all like higher level features like wallet and chat. So those are native implementations. And by native, I mean that they rely on mobile specific API and they provide like very nice interaction and user experience and smoothness. And then on top of that, dApps or web dApps, the dApps you currently know, like CryptoKitties, they will run on top of our browser implementation. So the browser itself is a native implementation, but then those web dApps, they actually rely on web features. And so they are implemented in HTML and JavaScript. So that's a challenge for mobile world because most of the time those dApps are not like very well optimized for mobile, and they don't really provide very nice user interaction, user experience for a mobile platform like Status. Also, they are a bit separate from Status, so it's kind of something that will run inside Status, but not really integrated with the rest of our features. So now if you take a look to the diagram below, so that's extensions. And it's fairly similar, but the difference is that now the extension will run directly within our native layers. So which means first that you will get much better performance and platform integration. So you will get a much more interesting visual result. But also it means you can interact much more closely with all the features that Status provides and all the API we have. Like for instance, you can directly reuse wallet features, or maybe more interesting, like chat features. You could leverage our contacts and just send messages and that kind of things directly from within your extension. So which I think is very interesting for dApp developers, because then they can leverage well, or contacts, for instance. They don't have to rebuild a set of contacts, and they can directly send chats also, which is something that is kind of unique to Status, peer-to-peer chat. So yeah, so hopefully you can see the difference between dApps and extensions. So to design extensions and all the architecture behind those concepts, we follow some principles. And probably the most important ones are related to security and privacy. As I said before, because extensions will be directly running within Status, they potentially could access anything. But obviously we don't want that. So we still want to make sure that end user, they retain full control on the kind of information they will share, and that they cannot be easily scammed, or that they will not lose any fund, or that kind of things. So that's kind of like the main principle we have when designing extensions. So one derived principle is that extensions are completely data-based. So it's not a full programming language. It's just some kind of configuration that you will load inside status. So it's important because then it's much more easy for status to analyze and understand what this extension is doing. And then status is able to inform end user of what potentially this extension will do. So that's how you can get end user full control. Another important principle is we try to make building an extension very simple and very easy to manage the life cycle of your extension, like publishing it and providing new versions, that kind of things. So very few concepts, agnostic to the host platform, which I will detail a bit later, and no build. It's just, so you have this configuration database that will represent your extension, but then that's it. This is the only thing you have. There is no build, there is no tooling. It's just one file that you share on some decentralized storage. So I will just quickly introduce some concepts behind extension. And so an extension implements different hooks. And the hooks are defined by a host. So in our case, status is a host. So status will specify what can be extended. And then an extensions can provide implementation of those different hooks. Then when you want to concretely implement your extension, you will manipulate concepts of views, queries, and events. So with those four concepts, hooks, views, queries, and events, that's pretty much all you have to know to create an extension. Then extensions are hosted so on decentralized storage like IPFS or Swarm, and they leverage Ethereum. So it's very tied to all the Ethereum concepts like Whisper or all the contract stuff. And then as a status user, so how do you manipulate extensions and what can you do with extensions? Well, you will load an extension via ENS name. And that's kind of the only thing you know about the extension when you want to load it. And then once this extension will be loaded, you will get back as a user some information detailing what is involved with this extension. And you have you still have the control. You can decide to install it or not. And once it's installed, you can deactivate it or not. So there is some concept of life cycle of an extension. So extensions are built on top of a framework called Pluto, which is separate from status, mainly just to simplify and because status is already quite a complex code base. But also the interesting concept here is that Pluto, which provides the implementation of all the concepts, is host agnostic. So status is the mobile host for Pluto, but you can imagine like other hosts, like for instance, web-based host. And actually we are using the web-based host to perform our tests and to simplify the development of Pluto. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to detail here. Pluto will provide all the implementation of the basic building blocks and logic behind the concepts. It will also like abstract all the Ethereum interaction. So that's kind of the job of Pluto. And then each host, and the first one and the most important one is status. Hosts, they will implement the native view because Pluto is really just an abstract grammar for your dApp. But then, because we want to have this native integration and native feeling, this has to be implemented by the host. Like for instance, in the case of status, this will be implemented using a React Native that provides us like direct integration with the mobile API. And then the second thing that the host will define is all the hooks. So how can status be extended? Like for instance, one of the main hook is chat comments. But then you need per host, you need to define how you want this host to be extendable. So that's the concept of a hook. And then eventually each host can have like specific capacities. Like for instance, status has access to chat. And so the chat features, they will be available as events, for instance. And this depends on each host. So I will go through those concepts in just a bit more details, but not very technical, so should be fine. So yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. But a hook, sorry, is what allows like developers to understand what is exposed by status. So yeah, as I was saying, chat commands, but also specific token panels, like if you want to customize how CryptoKitties is displayed inside status, this will be a different type of hook. And those hooks, they are implemented by extensions. So once you will load an extension, then you will see all the different hooks that are provided and implemented by these extensions. And as an end user, this is kind of what you care about, which hooks will be implemented. And those hooks have some specific semantic. So each hook, you will define the kind of information that is needed to implement it. Like for instance, a chat command, you must provide a scope. Like, will it be available in just one chat or in public chat? So this is an information that has to be provided by the extension. And this is validated during the installation. So once you will load an extension inside Status, Status will verify that all the implementation match the hook definition, and so that there is no mismatch and all the contracts are fulfilled. So views are the UI elements or how you manipulate information. Technically, it doesn't have to be completely UI related. It could be like command line stuff, for instance. But those, it's really just how you want to manipulate and surface the data inside status. So it's purely declarative based. So which means you will once just define the shape of your information and how it's exposed. But then it's very static and easy to do. Which is like a big shift from traditional web development. So it's very similar to what React does. And so then once you have the shape of what you want to display, you need to define how this information is linked and where is the information coming from. So in extension, everything is stored in a single place called the local state. And I will detail just in the next slide how it works. And finally, we try to leverage material design because Google did a lot of work here, and I think it just makes sense to reuse what they did. So then how do you get your information and how you link your information like from the local status to your view? So you do this through the concept of query. And query is a way to just detail what kind of information I want to retrieve. And then I will assign this information and I will just define it inside my view. So it's based on the concept of universal data flow, so which means it's, again, very declarative and static. You will define statically what you want, and then every time your information is modified inside status, the content and the view will be updated automatically. You don't have to do anything specifically for that. So let's say, for instance, you are interested in like SNT exchanges. You could define, okay, I want to hook my view to some SNT details, and then you just specify this, and every time some SNT exchanges will go through your status node, that will be reflected in your extension. So it makes like UI very predictable and very easy to build. And finally, then how you can have user interact and make modification to your extension. So this is done through the concept of events. And events are the only way to modify the local state. So there are two ways to do that. Either it will be through a user interaction, like for instance, clicking on a button. Then you can trigger an event. This event could be, for instance, I want to perform some contract operation, or I want to send a web request, something like that. Or they will be done via like external events, like for instance, if you get some blockchain changes, or if you, well, that kind of things. Those two kind of interaction will modify the local state. Then in turn, it will be reflected by the queries, and queries will return different type of information, and which in turn will modify the view and how your information is surfaced by the extensions. Okay, so I made a small demonstration of what we have currently, just to show a little bit the kind of things that we have. Okay, so I will pause and make some comment, but here basically I'm just logging inside status. Okay, so first pause. Here you can see, so I'm in a 1-1 chat, and I have my regular chat command. So here, request and send. Those are the default chat commands that we have in status. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, so here you can see, so it's work in progress. So it's just my design. It has to be designed. So there's no official design yet. So in the profile now we have an extra element extensions, which is only available because I'm in development mode. And if I go inside here, so I can see that, whoops, it was a bit quick, but there are no extensions by default. And then, so you can add extension from within this panel by providing like the URL, or you can also scan a QR code. So, which is what I will do next. So I'm leaving status and I'm launching my camera app and scanning just a QR code. So it's just like the stock camera application you have on your phone. And then I can open it in status, which is like because it's actually inside this QR code, there is a universal link, and this universal link points to an extension. So I'm scanning it, okay. And then here directly, I can see that I have like some new screen that show me some details about this extension. So essentially, which extension this is. So for this example, it's just loading a GitHub file. I have access to some meta information like name, description. And finally, so it's very ugly, but hopefully you can understand what's going on. And then finally, I have a list of hooks. So which is like, as I said before, like what is very interesting for you as a end user. And so here in this case, the specific hook, there is only one hook implemented by this extension, and this is a status chat commands hook, whose unique identifier is dynamic command. And also, so it's again something that to clarify and to expand, but you can see there are no permission required to use this hook. So this is an information for the end user, just so that they can understand what's going on, what is the threat level associated to this extension. And when we loaded this extension, we didn't identify any error. And then here, so you can see that we can install it then. Okay, so you install this extension. So when you install one extension, all the associated hooks, they become available. So then we will go back. Okay, no, just to show you. So now in my extension panel, I can see that I have this extension loaded with some ID, and it's activated. Okay, and now we go back to the chat, and we can see that there is a new command. So it's a real demo. It's not like photoshopped or. And you can execute this command and get, well, it's not very useful what this command does, but at least it's showing something. Oops. Well, okay, so that's kind of the most technical slide, but it's just to show what actually is an extension. So this one is exactly the one that we saw in the small demo, and you can see a bunch of meta information. And then here is the implementation of this hook, so dynamic command. So you can see that it's available in public chat and personal chat, that it has one parameter whose name is name and whose type is text. And once it's sent, it will be previewed using this view. So this is some kind of syntax to reference this view, which is preview. And here, so that's like the view syntax. No, it's view, which is kind of abstract way to detail information, and a text element. And this text element contains as a label from, which is some information extracted from the command itself. Okay, well, not really important, but that's just to display a little bit the concept behind and how everything fits, and that everything is data here. There's no programming language whatsoever. Okay, so what's next? Next iteration, so, and we are targeting Ed Berlin for this. So we want to allow third-party developers to provide their own logic, because what I just showed so far is really, I think it's very powerful, but still it will be limited somehow because there's no programming language involved. So if you want to do some more advanced stuff, then you need to provide your own code, and probably using JavaScript, because that's kind of like most common language used those days. So that's what we want to implement. So it will have to run inside a sandbox, so a specific JavaScript runtime that will only have access to specific information and specific subset of the local states and that kind of things. And probably message passing based. So it's still work in progress. We're not quite clear how to implement that, but that would be an option. And similarly, well, right now views are also similar almost to HTML. You have access to text, inputs, lists, that kind of things. But then if you want to go crazy and implement like a map or very advanced stuff, like or games, you know, canvas-based games. So to do this, well, web views make a lot of sense, I think. And then there is no real limit to what you can do in an extension. So that's the goal for Ed Berlin. Next iteration. So right now, extensions are only ephemeral. So you scan your QR code, you get the extension, but once you restart status, then it's gone. And the same way, so all data associated to this particular extension are gone. So we want to provide persistence and survive status restarts if you want to, because I think maybe most of the extension probably don't want to be persistent actually. And then the last one for now would be for targeted status hackathon. And so it would introduce the concept of dependency. So having extensions depends on other extensions and reuse code written by other people. And kind of a related concept is versioning. So once you published your extension, then you want to push a new version. So how can you inform end users of that? So it will probably be based on ENS and just updating your ENS to point to a different version or something like that. So dependencies are quite important and interesting because, well, we have a number of very interesting projects in Ethereum, like things maybe like FOAM, F-O-A-M. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. So FOAM is providing some kind of decentralized coordinate system. And I think this kind of projects are really what will push extensions in general. If you can just reuse that directly and that either they provide extension or we can implement this ourselves and then provide this as a block that anyone can reuse, well, I think it's quite powerful. Okay, so that's kind of very short-term goals, you know, for Status Hackathon. It's like in maybe 2 months. Well, but then I think there are a number of very interesting ideas we can push further once we have this. So the first one is personally, I don't like existing dApps, web dApps. I think they're really bad, and that's probably the reason why no one uses them. So the extensions are kind of my way to, take over dApps and the web. And even dApp, the name is terrible, so please find a better name. And in the future, I think it would be really nice to have Status itself, because Status is a dApp, so extensions are dApp, everything is dApp. No, so we could have just Status being a collection of extensions, which almost remove the dependency on App Store, because then you would only need that very thin layer of Status that provide the extension support and Ethereum access, and then all the rest, like wallet, chat, and so on, they would just be extension. And this, we control the lifecycle of this extension because they are stored on decentralized storage. Which means also no really release cycle as we know them right now. And eventually, even after, just build your own Status and you can decide what is Status for you. Maybe you don't want to use the chat, or so you could do that with extension. Another pretty interesting stuff is related to the data nature of extensions, because it's only data structure like arrays and maps. It's very easy to build programmatically extension and to have tool create those. So it's similar to a concept that Andre was pushing a couple of months ago, Status Fiddle, but it would be like more advanced, because then now we have also event and queries. So you could create extensions with real data. Like you could like drag and drop elements, views and queries, so on, and then you directly see how the whole thing works, and with real information coming from the blockchain and so on. So it's kind of interacting development and kind of the old dream of IT. So we could include this in Status Desktop, actually, I think, because it would be a little bit hard inside mobile because of the form factor, but on a desktop, I think it would make sense to have this. And then more pragmatically, well, I just need more suggestion of what kind of things we want to extend inside Status. So what kind of hooks we want to make available to third-party developers. So we already have a couple, but I think that we want to have more. But then it's also important to always consider the privacy and security related to those, because you don't want to expose too much. And eventually some hooks might be dangerous just inherently. So that's something to consider. Okay, so with that, I'd like to open to question and feedback. And just to make sure you have some time to write something, I will just benefit this time to thank some people. And for the first one will be Jan, who implemented a lot of the dynamic chat command support recently. So thanks to him, we have this nice demo I just showed. Andre did a lot of code reviews around Pluto and extensions, so thanks. Thanks to Andy for the fancy pens. And thanks finally to Rachel for pushing really hard to make extension a reality, and for the help for this talk. Okay, so I'm not sure if we have any questions so far. I will just like wait.
None maybe in the YouTube channel that I can see.
Okay, I will wait maybe like 30 seconds more to see, and if not.
Sounds good. What do you have against the name dApp?
Yeah, well,
I don't mind the name.
Yeah, well, I think the name dApp is really confusing actually, because first, I'm not sure that decentralized is actually a feature. Maybe it's more an implementation detail. So I think it's confusing for end users. What is decentralized anyway? And even dApp, you have to explain it to the normal people. It's not transparent. The name is not transparent, at least now. And we want to move away from the web dApp with extension, so we need a new name. Okay, so well, if there is no question, feel free to ping me on Slack, or and I will share more details if you are interested. And then I will close this talk. And thank you for joining. And well, have a nice day.